Our national debt is now over $31 trillion. It's bigger than our GDP. Our debt is bigger than our GDP. In just the last 27 months, the Biden administration has increased the national debt by $7 trillion. How much is that? I mean, it's an incomprehensible number, but here's the context. It took 215 years from George Washington to George W. Bush to accrue that much debt. Interest payments on that debt have hit more than $400 billion this year. So according to calculations by Pew, that's $100 billion more per year than we spent on elementary and secondary education, disaster relief, agriculture, and environmental protection combined. Within the next decade, interest costs on the debt will be greater than spending on national defense and Medicaid. Within 30 years, interest payments will be the single largest expenditure in the entire federal budget, bigger than Social Security. And a lot of that debt, you should know, well over $1 trillion, is owned by China, the country we're now fighting in Ukraine. You see how this works? Most Americans do see how it works, and they oppose it. They're afraid of it. They should be. Polls show clearly they oppose it. But here's the interesting thing. Neither party in Washington cares what their voters think. Here, for example, is Republican Michael McCaul. He is the Republican Party's head foreign policy genius in the House, a man completely controlled by the intel agencies. But here he is on television explaining that in a democracy, it doesn't matter what voters think.
And a new poll is showing support among Americans for arming Ukraine is dropping. How concerned, Congressman McCaul, are foreign leaders you're speaking to that American support for Ukraine, particularly within your own party, is weakening?
I would say that support is still very strong. And this delegation, that's bipartisan, very strong support for Ukraine. I think where you're seeing a split from the administration, though, and I have to say that, Pamela, this is bipartisan as well, is that for the past year, we've been very slow at getting these weapons in the name of it being too provocative, whether it be Stingers, Javelins, these short-range artillery, now longer-range artillery, ATACMS that can take out the Iranian drones in Crimea, and also aviation like F-16. If we put this stuff in from the very beginning of this conflict, a year from now may have been very different.
So you'll notice that whenever there's a bipartisan consensus on something in Washington, it's a bad idea. Usually it's the worst idea. There's no bipartisan consensus on saving middle-class America or rescuing rural Americans from fentanyl. There's no bipartisan consensus on that. Nobody cares. The bipartisan consensus is that we should send the contents of the U.S. Treasury to a corrupt Eastern European country to facilitate World War III. Now, why is that? Well, the truth is Washington is so dysfunctional that funding a war, destroying things, is like the one thing they can do. And that's why they love it so much, because they can get something done. Of course, it's purely destructive. So we wanted to talk to Congressman Michael McCaul of Texas, the foreign policy genius, more about this. You don't care what your voters think, really? So we asked him to come on tonight. Why do you support a war that your constituents oppose? How does this benefit the United States? Are you proud that you helped Russia and China align in a bloc that's more powerful than the United States? Is that good for us? How does that work, Congressman? He can't make it, unfortunately. Congressman Mike Turner can't come either. He represents Ohio. Senator Mitt Romney of Utah didn't respond at all. Senators Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell were, of course, hard no's. No way! We're not going to answer questions. Shut up. We'll do CNN first. Now, you should know that everyone we just mentioned is a Republican. They can't defend this, of course. Only a very tiny number of Republicans voted to stop this insanity before it destroys the economy of the United States and triggers World War III. And they've been punished for it. And a lot of Republicans care, because on MSNBC, if you're against World War III, you're an agent of Putin. Watch.
10 House Republicans voted against military aid for Ukraine. Usual suspects, but I'll read them out here. Andy Biggs, Dan Bishop, Warren Davidson, Matt Gaetz, Paul Gosar, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massey, Ralph Norman, Scott Perry, and Tom Tiffany. The point is, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Vladimir Putin, and too often than I think anyone would like to acknowledge, Tucker Carlson, are all on the same page.
We're on Putin's side. It's funny how the people who hate the United States the most and spend the most time tearing it down, oh, it's tainted by the original sin of slavery, it's a terrible country, 1619 Project, who truly hate the United States, are the one who accuse people trying to save the United States from being destroyed in a pointless war of siding with a foreign dictator. Ignore them. They do not speak in good faith.